Accept my soul. Oh, take me, take me, take me, take me home. Take me home. Well, you've given me tenderness so I can know warmth. You've given me laughter so I can be free. You've given me honesty so I can know trust. You've given me you so I can be me. You've given me you so I can be me. Well, take my hand, oh, touch me now. Take my heart, feel my love. Take my life, accept my soul. Oh, take me, 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 take me home. Yeah, let's love each other.
God shall judge between the nations, and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. These are the words of one of the ancient prophets of Israel, words we hold on to, words that echo through time, as a vision of a world that is no longer marked by violence of any sort. Welcome to Central Presbyterian Church. My name is Chris. I am the pastor of this congregation. Welcome to all of you who are joining us for this event of lament and action and hope around gun violence. We gather today to envision a world free of gun violence and to speak to the epidemic of gun violence in our communities and in this country. I'm also reminded, especially today, that we live in a world marked by violence. In Ukraine, in Israel, in Gaza, in Sudan, in North Korea, in Latin America. Let us keep a moment of silence and hear the bell toll for those who, even in this moment, are dying, grieving, fighting, and fleeing, both around the world and right here at home. I'd like to welcome now the co-chairs of this event, Reverend Roger Grusing and Elder Virgie Bundy.
Hello. It was about a half year ago that the Mission and Justice Committee of this congregation became concerned that this issue would be forgotten or minimized. The legislature had done initial good work. The City Council of St. Paul had done initial good work. And we were afraid that people would say, that's done, it's finished, and move on. Well, planning for a public event to keep the concern alive began. And we quickly discovered that we are not alone in this place. You, your churches, your organizations are of like mind. The gun violence epidemic must end. So we invited you here today, and you are here. We are here as individuals, churches, synagogues, organizations. Thank you for your deep sadness, and thank you for your faithful hope.
As a church member, I welcome you here. As a great-grandmother, a grandmother, a mother, and a retired St. Paul public school teacher, I welcome you to this serious conversation. It is only by working together toward a gun violence-free community that we can change the problem before us. Violence does not end violence. Guns do not end arguments nor solve problems. They only create more violence and deep heartache. So this conversation today is an opportunity to focus on listening to others as we think about paths of action to end violence and its horrible after effects. Welcome to today's action-oriented conversation as we attempt to make a difference. Let's be God's instruments, changing the painful past toward a gun violence-free future. So bring your hope, bring your creativity, bring your commitment. Welcome to history.
It's our honor and privilege today to welcome a number of speakers representing different organizations and different works of advocacy. Our first speaker is Maggie Emery. She's the CEO of Protect Minnesota, a nonprofit working towards ending gun violence here in Minnesota. Maggie, thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. As the pastor said, my name is Maggie, and I'm the executive director of Protect Minnesota, which is the only state-based, statewide gun violence prevention organization here in Minnesota. I'm here today to talk a little bit about the landscape of gun violence in our state and to help us all understand what and who we're talking about when we talk about gun violence and gun violence victims. So I'll start by giving the broadest possible overview, which is that in 2021, which is the most recent year that we have data for, 571 Minnesotans were killed by gun violence. What science tells us is that we are able to understand a single death. We're able to comprehend it. We're able to know that if I tell you I lost a family member or a friend, you are able to feel that grief and empathize with me because you can understand what it's like to lose someone that you love. But if I tell you that 571 Minnesotans died, it's harder to understand what that means to every single one of those 571 families. It's harder even to comprehend what it means when I tell you that annually 40,000 or more Americans die due to gun violence. The other thing that I want to emphasize is that every single gun death is preventable. These aren't cancer deaths. These aren't deaths of old age. These are preventable deaths that could have been stopped. That's 40,000 grieving families annually that simply don't need to grieve. And we all have a role to play in what that looks like. So that's the broadest possible overview. But I also want to make sure that we all understand exactly what we're talking about when we talk about the ways that gun violence manifests here in Minnesota. And the first thing that I want to share with you all is that while we know that there's hundreds and hundreds of gun deaths in Minnesota, we know that the vast majority of those are firearm suicides. Now, firearm suicides are gun violence. In 2021, 69% of gun deaths in our state were suicides. And over the past decade, averaged out, it's closer to 80%. We also know that the vast majority of those in 2021 and in the decade prior, the vast majority of folks who die by firearm suicide are older white men in greater Minnesota. So when we talk about ending gun violence in our state, we need to talk about what's happening in our rural communities. We need to talk about loneliness and poverty and grief. We need to talk about brain drain and institutional seeping of resources. We need to talk about the fact that an average farmer in Minnesota is 71 years old. We cannot talk about gun violence without talking about issues of justice more broadly. And the same principle applies to when we talk about firearm homicides. In our state, 50% of those who die from firearm homicide are Black. Most of those are young men. Black young men make up less than 7% of the Minnesota population, but almost 50% of those who die by firearm homicide. So again, when we talk about this number, there is no way that we can talk about it without talking about issues of justice and equity. What we know is that if you take the map of redlining that happened here in the Twin Cities, and you take the map of the neighborhoods where gun violence is most common and most endemic, you can lay them on top of one another, and they fit just about perfectly. When we talk about the fact that we are losing our beloved community members, young Black men, and young Black women and older Black folks to gun violence, it's because we have institutionally and systemically, for decades, seeped resources out of their communities. There's lack of access to higher education. The education gap in Minnesota is still enormous. There's lack of access to housing loans and business loans and transportation and so many things that we take for granted. And if we don't talk about those things, and if we don't talk about access to justice and equity in our Black communities, in our communities of color, and in greater Minnesota, we will never see an end to violence and gun violence. And it is so important that we get together and we talk about how guns are a part, they are the instrument of that violence. But if we don't talk about the other ways that communities are systemically leached of access to justice, we cannot foresee an end to gun violence. There have been so many wonderful things happening in the gun violence space in the past year. At the legislature this past session, they passed extreme risk protection orders, which in other states have reduced firearm suicides by 11 to 13%. Given the number of folks who are dying by firearm suicide every year in Minnesota, 13% is hundreds of people. That makes it's dozens, over 100 people. It makes a really big difference, right? They also passed universal background checks on all gun sales, which means that if you're someone who's legally prohibited from owning a firearm, which there aren't very many reasons that you would be legally prohibited from owning a firearm. If you are, you really shouldn't have access to a gun. This means that now any time that you attempt to buy a firearm, a background check is going to be run to ensure that you can legally and safely own that firearm. Funding for community violence interruption services was passed this past year at the legislature. These are folks who many of us here probably don't see every day. They're folks who are out on the street stopping conflict as it happens and ending it before it erupts into gun violence, stepping between sometimes people who are pointing firearms at each other, talking someone down before they shoot a gun. These services keep our community safer, and without them, that 571 number would be a lot higher. And institutional support for these services is incredibly important. Here in St. Paul, they passed safe and secure storage provisions mandating that if you have a firearm in the home, that you store it safely. That means locked up in a biometric lock that only you can access with your fingerprint, unloaded, stored separately from locked ammunition. This is the only way to ensure that your firearm is not going to be used in a way that you didn't intend for it to be. In Minnesota already this year, 4 children have been unintentionally shot, and some of those killed, by a firearm that their parent or guardian left out loaded. It is unacceptable to lose children this way, and I implore you, if you are a gun owner, please keep your guns safely stored at all times. We're in a hopeful space right now. Violence is trending down all over the country. We've passed some really important pieces of legislation at the municipal level, at the state level, and I'm hopeful for all the things that are to come. But if we don't all come together and call for an end to gun violence and an end to injustice in our communities, gun violence won't end. I'm so grateful that you're all here today to be a part of that conversation, and look forward to having a chance to speak with each of you a little bit more about it. Thank you for your time.
As you sit here, if you look behind you, if you look out on the front steps, you'll see t-shirts with names and numbers on them. Those are the names of some of the people here in Ramsey County who have died from gun violence in 2021 and 2022. This is called a Memorial to the Lost. It's sponsored by an organization called Heeding God's Call to Prevent Gun Violence. We are surrounded by those who have died from gun violence, and we are urged on by their presence. Our next speaker is Samantha Johnson, a teacher in the St. Paul Public School District.
12 times is how many times I had to ask my class to be quiet last Friday during math. This is typical for my chatty group of third graders. On a Thursday afternoon last year, while teaching math, my school was placed on a lockdown. Not a drill, but a real lockdown. This was just a normal Thursday. We often hear our loudspeaker click on to relay messages to teachers such as indoor recess or other mundane notices. When the loudspeaker clicked on, we all went quiet to listen. Lockdown. This is not a drill. Lockdown. Without giving a single direction, my students moved to the designated safe space in our classroom, away from the window and door. In my head, I go through the checklist of all the things I need to do to keep my students and myself safe. This checklist has been ingrained in me longer than I've been a teacher. This process of locking down has been second nature to me since I started kindergarten because I've only lived in a time where school shootings were an everyday worry. 1, close the blinds. 2, turn off the lights. 3, check the hallway for any students. As I step outside the door to check, I notice my friend, the kindergarten teacher, with all of her students at the drinking fountain. She looks at me with a pale face as she starts telling her students to run back to their classroom down the hall. I tell her to bring them into my classroom as I run after a few kindergartners that have already made their way back to their room. Once the whole class of students was in my room, we pulled the door shut and locked. All my third graders and all her kindergartners in one classroom. In the dark, sitting silently. Once we have completed our mental checklist, we look at each other with fear. A look we would never show our students, but a look that stayed between us. I open my phone and text my family that we are in a lockdown. I don't know why or what is happening, but I'm scared, and I will update them as I can. My friend then realizes she doesn't have her phone, so she asks if she can borrow mine to send a text to her family as well. Without saying a word to each other, we both understood that there could be a shooter in our school. We could be killed, our students could be killed. We plan. We start moving desks in front of the door. We hold scissors in our pockets so we do not scare our students. How silly. We wanted to make sure we weren't scaring our students while they were in lockdown. They know there are people in our world that for some reason want to come into school and do harm. When students talk about it, they are blunt. Miss Johnson, we locked down because someone might come here to kill us. Miss Johnson, what happens if someone brings a gun here to shoot us? We were lucky that day, everyone was okay, but I still can't answer their question. Miss Johnson, how do we know we're safe? 32 students, 28 minutes, and 0 times that I had to ask students to stop talking. Thank you.
Invite now Dr. Sheldon Berkowitz. He's been a pediatrician for over 30 years at Children's, a bioethicist, and an advocate for gun violence prevention as a matter of public health. Thank you, Dr. Berkowitz, for being here.
That was really powerful. Hearing real-life experiences is real different than talking about theory and statistics. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this important event. I've been asked to speak about how this gun violence epidemic affects me personally and our medical communities in general, as well as suggestions on what our communities can do to reduce the violence. As was mentioned, my name is Dr. Sheldon Berkowitz, and I'm a retired pediatrician, having spent the last 21 years of my career as a general pediatrician at Children's Minnesota in Minneapolis. I'm also the past president of the Minnesota chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, an organization that represents 1,000 pediatricians around the state. Preventative care is the bread and butter of pediatrics, and counseling families about how to keep their children safe was something I did every day in my practice. For most of my career, this discussion focused on car seats and seatbelts, safe sleeping, and for adolescents, discussions about substance abuse and other appropriate topics. However, in 2018, this all changed for me with the Parkland school shooting in Florida. I had already been donating money to various causes, working to reduce gun violence since the Sandy Hook shootings in 2012. And practicing in an urban setting in Minneapolis, I unfortunately had seen patients and families impacted by gun violence and had to support them in their grief. However, it was 2018 that really marked the beginning of my advocacy work, to reduce gun violence in our community, state, and around the country. We have all read about the mass shootings in Sandy Hook, Parkland, and Uvalde. But it is important, as Maggie already mentioned, for us to also realize gun violence impacts all of us here in Minnesota. Just in the past 2 months, we have heard about a 7-year-old in Brooklyn Park finding a handgun in his home and accidentally shooting his 9-year-old brother, who thankfully survived. Then there's the 12-year-old child visiting his grandmother's house in St. Paul for a birthday party, who was killed by a 14-year-old at the party who found a gun in the house. And only 3 days after that tragedy, a 3-year-old in Hinckley, Minnesota, found a handgun in his home and accidentally killed himself. We also need to remember the 5 people shot and killed at Accent Signage Systems in Minneapolis in 2012. In 2021, firearm injuries overtook car accidents as the leading cause of death for children and youth in the United States. Most of these persons dying are disproportionately male and persons of color. Children, youth, and adults are also dying at an alarming rate by suicide due to guns in Minnesota and the U.S. Every day, an average of 53 children and teens are killed or injured by firearms in the U.S. Most of the deaths from firearms in young children occur in the home, and over 4.5 million children live in a home in the U.S. with unlocked loaded guns. In the past decade, 40% of the suicides committed by children and teens involved guns, most of which belong to a family member. In Minnesota, firearms are used in 45% of suicide deaths, 65% of homicide deaths, and 54% of interpersonal violence homicide deaths. So what can we do? First, while personally I would like to see all guns banned in this country, my focus is on preventing gun violence. Implementation of safe storage rules have been shown to decrease firearm-related death and injury, as well as adolescent suicides. Securing a gun with a simple lock puts space between the suicidal thought and the trigger and may prevent that person from committing suicide, since research shows that if an individual considering suicide can't access the method they plan, they generally don't seek out another lethal means to kill themselves. Second, as a pediatrician, talking to families about making sure that if they own a gun in their home, they keep it locked up, unloaded, with the trigger lock in place, and keep the ammunition locked up separately is crucial preventative counseling. Also, talking to children and youth about the importance of not playing with or picking up a gun they might find, but letting an adult know. Physicians and healthcare professionals taking care of patients of all ages can have these same conversations with their parents. Third, if any of us know of a person dealing with mental health issues and/or suicidal ideation, removing all guns from that person's house is essential for the reasons I already mentioned. Fourth, advocating for strong gun laws at our state and local levels is something we can all do, as well as being involved with and donating to organizations such as Protect Minnesota, Moms Demand Action, and Everytown for Gun Safety. Finally, if you are a gun owner but want to reduce gun violence, please talk to your gun owner friends about these issues, as they may hear these messages better from you than from a non-gun owner like myself. As a pediatrician, I care deeply about the health and well-being of our state's children and youth. However, none of us can help our patients if they are on the floor dying from a gunshot wound. Thank you and good luck.
Listen to these words from the Hebrew Scriptures. Thus says the Lord, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are no more. A week and a half ago, Monica Joy Holly died from a firearm. She was a member of the broader Central community through Dayton Avenue Press. I'd like to invite Catherine Lloyd forward to speak, a member here at Central as well as part of and a member of the former Dayton Avenue Presbyterian Church community. Welcome.
So this is a brief tribute, lament, and memorial, just prayers for the family, friends, and community of Monica Joy Karen Lynn Holly. Say her name. My name is Catherine Lloyd, and my husband, Dr. Ernest Lloyd, and I are members of the Dayton Avenue Presbyterian Church family. And we are members here today with Central Presbyterian Church in St. Paul. And so while the DAPC family has gone to different places, different congregations, we don't always see everybody. Since to our beloved church closed, we're all still in each other's hearts. It's still our family. It's our koinonia, which our Reverend David Stewart used to say frequently to us. And so, a couple Sundays ago, Bertie asked me, she said, can you help us? And I, quite frankly, I didn't know why I was called, but I was called. And so in preparation for this event today, to lament, to commit to action, and to hold a memorial for the loss of our beloved folk to gun violence, we received an email, and this is my way of expressing it. We received the email from Kathy Johnson, also a member of our Dayton Avenue Presbyterian Church family, and our extended family here at Central, and all the other congregations where we belong. And it read, and I quote, Monica Joy Holly, daughter of Monica Holly, granddaughter of Gail Wright, and great-granddaughter of Kathy Lawhead, was the young girl who lost her life in the random shooting this week. It was on October 4th. So it broke our hearts. We didn't understand. It was the fear that so many of us carry all the time when our children walk out the door, especially our children of color. Broke our hearts. It was too close. And Dr. Lloyd and I, my husband, who could not be here today, but his prayers are with us, we talked about it, and we talked about holding the little ones at Dayton Avenue Presbyterian. And of course, Monica Joy's great-great-great-grandmother, Dorothy, who's passed on to heaven, was always there with Kathy, and in would walk Monica, Joy's mom, holding the babies, and so we watched them grow. We watched them learn to love, to be part of our beloved community. And I imagine there's a few of us here. You could raise your hand or stand that knows our babies. And as a grandmother, it was like we had another little grandchild in the family, right? You just hold that baby and hug them tight and whisper sweet things in their ears. And so we stand up and we say, we remember. With sorrow, we lift up her family in prayer and grace as Monica Joy joins her father, great-great-grandmother, and cousin in heaven. So let us say her name out loud, along with all the other names that we see here today. Last Sunday when I came to church, my husband and I sat in the back with the T-shirts, and I cried, and I could feel the spirit of the children, of the young adults, of the people who died by such violence. And so let us say her name again, her whole name, Monica Joy Karen Lynn Holly, age 14. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I'd like to invite forward now Reverend Pamela Gojiri. She's the co-director of Racial Justice at the Minnesota Council of Churches and a pastor in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Welcome.
You never know when something that we hear about or read about regularly in the news comes home to roost to you personally. So just this week, my granddaughter received an email from my great-grandson's school saying that there had been a threat. They decided to say the date. So they said that on October 12th, there will be violence at the school. My great-grandson is 13 years old. Very close to home. So this morning I want to talk briefly with you, where are we? How did we get here and how do we change it? How did we get so far from being able to see the face of God when we look at one another? That, my friends, is one of the reasons why we're experiencing the epidemic of violence. How have we devolved to a wild, wild west type of so-called justice? And as for the church, some of the victims are our members. Some of the perpetrators are our members as well. We've held funerals, we've provided visitation, support and care for families. We've also felt the pain and the confusion as to why these types of atrocities keep happening. We have felt helpless and clueless and confounded. We have felt inadequate in our responses and in figuring out next steps. We have questioned who we are, who we thought we were, and if we're being honest, we've asked, where is God in all this mess? As a church body, there are expectations for some that we should have the answers. We do not. We too have to find our role, find our voice, and our footing in this journey toward change. We too have to examine what we see in the faces of folks who don't look like us, and even in the faces of those who do look like us. And we must figure out what part we play in changing this awful trajectory. We have to figure out how to disentangle our personal views and feelings from what the gospel says about being in right relationship with one another. We then must find the courage to do that hard work without regard to what others might say. When I wrote this sermon, I had written it before we got the gun threat about my grandson's school, and I had said everyone has been touched by gun violence, whether peripherally or personally. So for me this week, it was personally. You can't avoid it. And as much as one might want to move forward or ignore it, we can't. We have come to realize, or I have come to realize, that we have to sit with this occurrence, with this chaos, with this epidemic, as uncomfortable as it is. And we must sit because we must be fully present in understanding the need for our full buy-in to working toward solutions and toward identifying possible answers. To demonstrate our solidarity with the families directly involved, those of both the victims and the perpetrators, and we must sit so we can allow ourselves to grieve and to lament, which sets the foundation that is necessary in moving toward healing. We must feel it so that we can vow to do the work toward ensuring that no one else should have to feel this again. We must sit with this because we need to understand how we got here and why we should not stay here. We must sit in this until we find our way back to the gospel of Christ and his command to love one another. And in our sitting, and in our feeling, and in our grieving, and lamenting, and presence, we can once again look at one another and begin to see familiarity in our faces, compassion in our faces, God in our faces. This is where we need to be. This is where we must start. This is one of the first steps toward the hoped-for result of making gun violence a thing of the past and how we change things. God is our hope. Isaiah 58, verses 11 and 12 in the New Living Translation says, "The Lord will guide you continually, giving you water when you are dry and restoring your strength. You will be like a well-watered garden, like an ever-flowing spring. Some of you will rebuild the deserted ruins of your cities. Then you will be known as a rebuilder of walls and a restorer of homes." That's what we want to be. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend Pam. We're going to sing a little bit now. Many of you know the power of song in changing the world. Ron Letness is going to lead us. He's a pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, an advocate for the prevention of gun violence in both the church world and in the nonprofit world. Thanks for being here to lead us in song, and might I suggest that we stand for a moment.
I think you have a song that was passed out. It's called "It Is Time." It is a song that was born out of lament. Because when we are in the depths, we cry. We cry out. Jesus in Gethsemane was faced with that. My God. And Peter took a sword and he cut the ear off a soldier. And then Jesus put the ear back on the soldier. And Jesus says, "Enough. No more of this." And it was born out of lament. Please sing along. It is time, it is time, it is time to say enough. It is time to say no more. It is time, it is time, it is time to get tough. It is time to restore. Too many children, too many innocents, feel the sting of the lead. Too many workers, too many students are laid in the ground cold dead. Well, it is time, it is time, it is time to say enough. It is time, say no more. It is time, it is time, it is time to get tough. It is time to restore. Second Amendment, twisted, abused. I've got my right to put you in my sight. Regulation blindly refused because I've got my rights. Well, it is time, it is time, it is time to say enough. It is time to say no more. It is time, it is time, it is time to get tough. It is time to restore. Purchasing weapons like candy in a store, background checks for some. But if you're hazy or ethically shady or private sale and mum, well, it is time, it is time, it is time to say enough. It is time to say no more. It is time, it is time, it is time to get tough. It is time to restore. Well, I got my right to stand my ground. Make my day, protect my life. I've got my freedom to shoot a few rounds, oh, justify and strike. Well, it is time, it is time, it is time to say enough. It is time to say no more. It is time, it is time, it is time to get tough. It is time to restore. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness are not their right. Freedom to love, free to be my best, so free from hate and strife. Well, it is time, it is time, it is time to say enough. It is time to say no more. It is time, it is time, it is time to get tough. It is time to restore. Well, safety for all, freedom for all, joyous life for all. Friend with each other, sisters and brothers, oh, gentle like a feather. It is time, it is time, it is time to say enough. It is time to say no more. It is time, it is time, it is time to get tough. It is time to restore. One more time. It is time, it is time, it is time to say enough. It is time to say no more, no more. It is time, it is time, it is time to get tough. It is time to restore.
You may be seated. Jesus said these words. He said, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid." Over the last hour or so, you've heard stories about the devastation caused by gun violence. Some stories may have been surprising, but I suspect some of them may have been tragically familiar. You've heard professional accounts of people working in policy and healthcare. You've heard the raw reality of personal grief. You've been reminded that marginalized and vulnerable people are disproportionately likely to be victims of gun violence, that gun violence lives at the intersection of race, of class, of gender, and much more. You've heard that most who die with a gun in this state die by suicide. And if you're like me, you might be feeling overwhelmed. If you're like me, you might be overwhelmed by the enormity of the crisis. and the daily grief. Overwhelmed by the complexity of gun violence, perhaps suspecting that easy solutions of an epidemic of this magnitude are hard to come by, especially politically. Overwhelmed that we seem powerless in the face of such a thing. So what do we do? The Pirkei Avot, it's a book of collected wisdom from the ages, from the Jewish rabbis, has this to say about the enormous problems of the world. It says, "You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it." For a very long time, wise people have known that the grief of the world is too great to bear alone, too great even for one generation to bear without another. You are not obligated to complete the work. The work of bringing about justice is an endeavor for the whole of the human family, generation after generation. But neither are you free to desist from it, because the work of bringing about justice is part of who we are as that whole human family. It is part of our humanity. So how then do we remain persistent in this call to end gun violence? How do we refuse to desist from the work? 3 things come to mind. The first, keep lamenting. Lament is a powerful force in the work for justice, one that justice-seeking people, from the prophets of old to the prophets of today, employ and live within. Lament illuminates injustice. Lament stands with those who suffer and are oppressed. Lament reckons with the gravity of what is wrong. Lament helps us look past our own privilege and see the experience of another. Let us be cautious about moving too quickly past lament, lest some people be left behind in the work. 2, advocate. Advocacy is strategic and it is persistent. Continue to understand the issues of gun violence in greater depth. There are resources after resources out there. Investigate the root causes. Listen to the voices of those who are too often ignored or silenced. Partner with and financially support organizations that know the ins and outs of advocacy and policy. Vote. Politics and policy are how we put our values into practice in public. 3, hope. The theologian Cornel West has this to say about hope. He says, "I cannot be an optimist, but I am a prisoner of hope." I think what he means is that simple optimism fails us. It falls flat because the evidence is against us, by all accounts. Gun violence daily destroys life, and by the numbers, it's not getting better. But hope is not the same as optimism. Hope believes that it doesn't have to be this way. Hope believes that there's something more, and that there is a possibility of a good and a just and a peaceful reality. Hope creates. In this community here, a Christian community, we hope because we believe that God is leading us towards that good, just, and peaceful reality. We believe that justice is a divine calling. But this work transcends religion, because the good of all humankind is contingent on the work of justice. I don't doubt that each and every person here already believes that eradicating gun violence is essential for the good of all. You already know that. I hope, though, that you have been renewed in this hour for the work, fed for the journey, and empowered for good. Before we close, let us sing one more time together. Please stand.
I was at a concert of Peter, Paul, and Mary, and they concluded the concert with this song, and If I Had a Hammer. And I think some of us probably know this one. And a song about racial justice, about equality, but it's a song about people living together, working together, loving together, and being a community and a family and together. The song about people, taking care of each other, because in the church we believe that all people just are created in the image of God. And so in that spirit, and in the spirit of I Had a Hammer, let's sing it as best we can. Just feel welcome to clap your hands, stomp your feet. For gun violence prevention, If I Had a Hammer. If I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning, hammer in the evening, all over the I'd hammer in church, I'd hammer out the morning, I'd hammer out the love between my brothers and the sisters, all over this land. If I had a bell, I'd ring it in the morning, ring it in the evening, all over this land. I'd ring out danger, I'd ring out a warning, I'd ring out a love between the brothers and the sisters over this land. Ooh, if I had a song, I'd sing it in the morning, sing it in the evening, all over this land. I'd sing out danger, but I'd sing out a morning. I'd sing out the love between the brothers and the sisters over this land. Ooh, but I got a hammer, and I got a bell, and I got a song to sing all over this land. Well, it's a hammer of justice, but it's a bell of freedom. It's a song about love between my brothers and my sisters. Over this land, it's a hammer of justice, but it's a bell of freedom. It's a song about love between my brothers and my sisters. Over this land.
All right, we're not done. As you depart from this space, I'm going to invite you to go downstairs. That's through those doors over there. Go down the stairwell, go down to the dining room. There are going to be representatives of local and national organizations working towards a world free from gun violence. This is a way to learn more and to put the things that we care about into practice. I also want you to know that outside afterwards in the parking lot, there's going to be a blacksmith converting dismantled firearms into tools for gardening, putting into practice literally the call of the prophets to turn our swords into plowshares. I want to thank so many people for making this day possible, including our guest speakers, our representatives from these organizations, volunteers from Central Presbyterian Church who are all around the building, and more. And thank you all for being here and putting the things that we care about so deeply into practice in the ways that we can here and today. At this congregation on Sunday mornings, when we end worship, there's a thing that we all say. I say, God is out there, and the people say, let us go forth. I will modify that for today. I will say that the work is out there, and we will say, let us go forth. Are you all ready? The work is out there. Let us go forth.